Why can't we have everything we want in the world? Why does choosing one thing usually mean giving up on another? Like study or sleep, or to save money, or go out with friends? That single problem is the entire reason why economics exists. Welcome to AP Macroeconomics Unit 1. Before inflation, unemployment, recessions, let's start with the basics, which is going to be scarcity and opportunity cost, the PPC, comparative and absolute advantage, and demand supply market equilibrium, as well as the circular flow. Let's start with scarcity and opportunity cost. All right, this right here is probably the most important idea in all of economics, not just micro, but also macro. Let's start with scarcity. Scarcity just means that you don't have enough of everything. There are limited resources like time, money, and energy, and because of that, you're forced to choose. Even choosing not to decide is still a decision. Now, here's where it gets a bit more interesting. Every single choice comes with trade offs, and when you choose one thing, you're giving up something else. There's no such thing as like a free choice. And that takes us to opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the next best alternative you give up when you make a decision. It's not everything you give up, but it's just the next best option. So if you decide to watch this video instead of partying with friends, then your opportunity cost isn't everything you could have done. It's just the best thing you didn't choose. So if you look here, you could think of it like a chain. Scarcity forces choices, and choices create trade-offs, and the value of that trade-off is your opportunity cost. And this appears on the test, so take note of that. And before we move on, there is a bit of a confusion some students make. Scarcity is a permanent condition, and sometimes people confuse that with shortages. A shortage occurs when a product runs out at a particular price, and we'll cover that later on. Okay, basically everything we buy or use in an economy comes from four basic ingredients called the four factors of production. And the first is land. Now, this doesn't just mean the land you build on, it means everything that comes from nature. So that could be water, oil, trees, and farmland. So if it's from earth and it's like a natural resource, it's part of land. Then next we have labor, and this is just people working. So teachers, baristas, delivery drivers, engineers. If a human is putting in effort, that's part of labor. And then there's capital. And these are tools that help people do their jobs better. So that could be computers, machines, factories, or even kitchen equipment. Capital isn't money, but it's the stuff used to produce goods and services. And finally, we have entrepreneurship. And this is a person who puts everything together. The entrepreneur takes the risk, makes the decisions, combines land, labor, and capital, and hopes the business actually works and makes a profit. So literally every product you see, from coffee to, let's say, cell phones, exists because these four factors came together. Okay, it's time for our very first quiz time. Help me carefully read this MCQ and find the correct answer. Okay, let's walk through this together. Because of scarcity, firms can't do everything they want. In this question, the firm has only one machine, so it has to choose make product X or product Y. It can't do both at the same time. So here's the important part. When the firms decide to make more of product X, it has to give up some of product Y. That thing it gives up is what we care about. Opportunity cost is not total output and not total money spent, and it's just what you give up when you make a choice. So the opportunity cost of producing one more unit of good X is the value of the next best alternative the firm sacrifices, which is good Y. And that's why the correct answer is C, the value of the next best alternative foregone. Anytime you see scarcity, choices, and trade-offs, your brain should immediately go to opportunity cost. Now let's move on to the very first graph for this unit, which is the PPC. Okay, this graph shows up on the exam all the time, so make sure you know it and not memorize it. I've gotten so many questions wrong by just memorizing how the graph looks, and don't make the same mistake. Okay, At its core, a PPC shows the maximum combinations of two goods an economy can produce when it uses all of its resources efficiently. And that matters. Maximum combinations, two goods, and efficient use of resources are all phrases that you should remember. And if you see those words on the AP exam, they're talking about a PPC. Now, the PPC is really about three big ideas. And first is efficiency. Any point on the curve means the economy is producing as much as it can with the resource it has. And points inside the curve are inefficient, and points outside the curve are unattainable. And you'll see how that looks like later on. Second is trade-offs. Because resources are limited, producing more of one good means producing less of another. And lastly, it's opportunity cost. Every movement along the PPC has an opportunity cost measured by what you give up for the other good. Now, on the AP exam, opportunity cost on a PPC is always shown by movement along the curve, not by money. Now, a really common PPC example is capital goods versus consumer goods. Think of machines versus pizza. Pizza here is the consumer good. Pizza gives you satisfaction now, and machines help you produce more in the future. So when an economy chooses more capital goods, it sacrifices consumption today in exchange for future economic growth. Now, when an economy chooses more consumer goods, it enjoys more now, but gives up future production potential. And now this trade-off between present consumption and future growth is one of the biggest ideas the PPC is trying to show. Now, sometimes the PPC is a straight line, but sometimes it's curved. Let's start with a straight PPC. Now, this PPC here is a straight line, and that tells us something important right away. A straight line PPC means constant opportunity cost. Why? Because the resources used to make chairs and desks are very similar. They both use like wood, metal, or like chair and desk stuff. So that means the opportunity cost is constant. If workers and machines that make chairs can easily switch to making desks, then every time you give up chairs, you give up the same number of chairs to make more desks. Does that make sense? Okay, now let's look at a bowed out PPC. A curved PPC shows increasing opportunity cost. And that happens when two goods use different types of resources. Like pizzas and computers, those are completely different things. Pizzas uses cooks, kitchens, and ovens, while computers uses engineers, factories, and advanced technology. So as you shift more and more resources towards computers, you're pulling resources that are less and less suited for that job. So each additional computer costs more pizzas than the last one. And this is called the law of increasing opportunity cost. So the key takeaway here is that the curved PPC equals increasing opportunity cost because resources are not equally efficient in all uses. So if you're ever asked why a PPC is bowed out, the answer is not scarcity or inefficiency. And the correct answer is the specialized resources. Now let's look at what the different points on a PPC actually mean. A point can represent efficiency, inefficiency, or unattainability. Okay, help me focus on the points on the curve. Points like A, B, C, and D are all on the curve. So that means the economy is operating at full efficiency, and all available resources are being used, even in points A and D. Now, on a test, if a point is on the curve, you should immediately think about maximizing resources. Now, shift your attention to point F. Point F is inside the curve. Now, this represents inefficiency, and some resources are unemployed, underused, or even misallocated. Now, the economy could produce more of at least one good without giving up on anything else. So if you see words like unemployment, recession, or idle resources, you should expect a point inside the PPC. Now, look at point E. Point E is outside the curve. This point is unattainable given the resources and current technology. Now, the economy simply cannot produce that combination right now. On the AP exam, outside the curve means unattainable unless there's economic growth, like more resources, better technology, or increasing human capital. And we'll talk about shifts in the next slide. So here's a simple way to log this in. On the curve equals efficient, inside the curve equals inefficient, and outside the curve means unattainable. Okay, now let's talk about what happens when the entire PPC shifts. This part is not about moving along the curve, but the entire curve itself moving. Okay, start with the curve in the middle. This represents the economy's current productive capacity. Now look at what happens when the PPC shifts outward. An outward shift of the PPC represents economic growth. That means the economy can produce more of both goods than before. And this can happen because of an increase in resources, improvements in technology, investment in capital goods, and increases in human capital. And notice that the entire curve moves outward, not just one point. And that's how you know it's a growth, not just a different choice. Now, take a look at an inward shift. An inward shift means economic decline. Now, the economy's ability to produce has decreased. And this can happen because of natural disasters, loss of resources, or even a war. Okay, it's time for a second quiz. Slow this down and think step by step. Okay, first, the economy is producing inside the PPC. And that tells us something important right away. There are unused or inefficiently used resources. So without changing resources, the government or the economy can already improve just by using what it has better. Next, the government improves worker training. But notice how they said, without changing the amount of available resources. That means there is no immediate outward shift of the PPC in the short run. Training takes time to fully translate into higher productivity. So what happens in the short run? The economy can move from a point inside the PPC to a point on the PPC, simply by becoming more efficient with existing resources. Now think about the long run. Better trained workers are more productive, and over time that increases the economy's productive capacity. And when productive capacity increases, the entire PPC shifts outward. So on the short run, move onto the PPC. Long run, the PPC shifts outward, which is why the answer is choice B. Okay, now things will get a little bit tricky. Let's move on to comparative and absolute advantage. Okay, this is where a lot of people get stuck, so let's slow this down. We're going to talk about absolute and comparative advantage. Let's start with absolute advantage. Absolute advantage just asks who is better at producing something. So if one person or a country can produce more of a good using the same resources, they have the absolute advantage. It's basically who can make more. And now let's talk about comparative advantage. Comparative advantage asks the question of who gives up less. More specifically, who has the lower opportunity cost. And the really important rule is that trade is based on comparative advantage and not absolute advantage. You can be worse at producing literally everything and still benefit from a trade if you have a lower opportunity cost in one good. Now, let's talk about how to calculate opportunity cost. And this is where a lot of mistakes happen. There are two main methods you'll see on the exam. First is the output method, and this is where OOO comes in. Output other goes over, or OO. That means the good you're calculating the opportunity cost for goes on top, and the other good goes on the bottom. And this method is usually used when the problem gives you output numbers directly. And I'll show you how to use this later on. The second method is the input method, and the memory trick here is IOU. This method is used when the problem tells you how many inputs, like hours of workers, are needed to produce each good. No matter which method you use, the goal is always the same. Find the opportunity costs and compare them. Okay, so here's the takeaway. Absolute advantage is about who is better, and comparative advantage is about who gives up less. And trade always follows comparative advantage.
Great work today! Keep watching the next videos, and let's do great on the AP exam together!